In every epic saga, there always seems to be at least one bumbling fool who, although being on the right side, seems to unintentionally wreak havoc. In Star Wars, one might say that this is Jar Jar Binks, but in Lord of the Rings, it might not be who you would think if you've only watched the films. Lovers of the movies might quickly jump to the conclusion that Pippin is the cause of many issues throughout the trilogy, and while that is definitely true, the real fool in the franchise is none other than a man named Barliman Butterbur, the innkeeper at the Prancing Pony. In fact, Butterbur's error almost single-handedly brings an end to Frodo's journey before it even begins, and it is only thanks to a man called Strider that the hobbits survive the night in the Prancing Pony. Welcome back to Movies vs. Manuscripts, the series in which I analyze Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, scene by scene, and compare it to Tolkien's original work. The past few episodes, I know we have covered multiple scenes at a time, but today we are only covering one scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, which is called At the Sign of the Prancing Pony. Tolkien dedicates 2 chapters to what Peter Jackson makes one scene, in which we get to know the innkeeper and meet one of our main characters of the whole saga, Aragorn, aka Strider. The reason why today we're only covering this one scene is because although Jackson boils it down to just a few minutes, there are quite a few things that happen during this time that are very important to the story. So let's jump right in and take a look at what happens during this scene in the film, and then we'll go over our 4 categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot changes. The scene picks up after the hobbits have just escaped the Black Riders by hitching a ride on the Buckleberry Ferry. After arriving at the gates of Bree, a small town outside of the Shire, the hobbits knock and are answered by a man who, in the books we know as Harry the Gatekeeper, and he asks them who they are and what their business is. After saying that their business is their own, the gatekeeper lets them in and they head to the Prancing Pony. After entering, Frodo goes up to the barman and asks if he can tell Gandalf that they are there, as Gandalf had previously told Frodo that he would be waiting for him at the inn. The barman, who is called Barliman Butterbur in the books, answers by saying that he hasn't seen Gandalf for over 6 months. The 4 hobbits find a table and get some food and drink as Frodo wants to believe that Gandalf is still going to arrive. He notices a strange man in the corner who's been staring at him and asks Barliman who it is. Butterbur says it's a ranger known as Strider, but he doesn't really know his real identity. At that moment, Frodo also realizes that Pippin has revealed his true name to the people at the bar. Trying to make his way to Pippin and get him to stop talking, Frodo trips and falls, which causes the ring to fly into the air and land perfectly on his finger, and he turns invisible to the astonishment of everyone in the tavern. Frodo crawls away and after taking the ring off, is seized by Strider. The ranger tells him that he is drawing too much attention to himself and drags him to an upstairs room of the inn. In the room, Strider shares that he knows what hunts Frodo and that he should be more afraid. Before they speak any further on the matter though, Sam, Merry, and Pippin come bursting into the room and Sam cries out, "Let him go or I'll have you, Longshanks," and that is where the scene ends. So let's jump into the first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location changes. Aside from the 4 hobbits who we're already very familiar with, the characters we see or meet in the scene are the gatekeeper, the innkeeper, Strider, and a couple of strange men who stare at Frodo. In the movies, these strange men don't really mean anything and they aren't given a name, but in the books, they actually represent an important person to the plot. And speaking of Tolkien's characters, let's go over who is missing from this scene. First, we have Bill Ferny and his unnamed associate, who you could associate to the strange men in the bar, and then we have Butterbur's assistants, Bob and Nob, who are hobbits living in Bree. It's important to note that in Tolkien's writings, hobbits live in the area, although separate from humans, but they all would gather and commune together in the town, which explains why 2 hobbits are working at the inn. As far as location and timeline changes, there are none that I could spot. Just like in the films, the book portrays the hobbits as staying the night in the inn and then leaving the next day, which we'll cover in next week's episode. And obviously, the location is the same, which is the Prancing Pony. I guess one small location change is that Merry wanders throughout the town in the books, and something happens to him near Bill Ferny's house, but we'll get to the details of that encounter during the plot changes. And speaking of which, I'm going to try my best to keep all of these plot changes in chronological order, per usual, as we discover what Tolkien really says happened during this night in Bree. And as I said at the beginning of the video, we're going to uncover the massive error that Butterbur the innkeeper made that nearly causes the deaths of Frodo and the other hobbits. So let's jump right in. But before we head into that, I just wanted to let you know that I actually have a Discord community for fantasy lovers like myself, so if you like to nerd out and have cool conversations conversations about Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and your other favorite franchises, as well as participate in community events and daily battles and RPG bots, then check out the link in the description and join the community today. Okay, back to the program. First, let's address the entry at the gate. In the books, Harry the Gatekeeper lets them in, and afterwards, Tolkien says that a dark figure climbs over the gate to presumably follow them. Later, we find out that this figure is Strider, as he has followed them since they were with Tom Bombadil. Another change in the book is that the hobbits still have 5 ponies with them. Next, they head to the inn, and this is where the most drastic changes occur. In Jackson's attempt to make the world of men appear rugged and worse off than that of the Shire, he changes the overall mood of the inn. The book describes the bar as a lively place filled with all kinds of people, men, dwarves, hobbits, and more, all merrily singing and talking together. It's not nearly as intimidating as portrayed in the movie. Also, they don't go directly to a table to wait for Gandalf. Frodo actually stops Barliman Butterbur and asks for accommodation. Frodo says that his name is Underhill, and Butterbur feels like he should be remembering something about 4 hobbits from the Shire, but it escapes him and he moves on. He says that the inn is busier tonight than usual, but thankfully, because they are hobbits, he has a hobbit-sized room available. Barliman's assistants, Bob and Nob, take care of the ponies, and the landlord helps get the hobbits to their rooms as well as bring them food and drink. After resting up for a little and eating, Butterbur invites the hobbits to join the company in the common room and enjoy their time at the inn. Sam, Pippin, and Frodo agree to join, but Merry says he will hang back in the room and perhaps go for a walk. And this is where we head into the portion that Peter Jackson portrays in his version of events. So, without Merry, the hobbits make their way to the common room, and under the pretense that Frodo is writing a book on history, the 3 hobbits talk to all the company and exchange stories. It's not like in the movies where they seem to be avoiding everyone and are the strange outsiders, with everybody staring at them. The only person who really seems to be watching them is a man in the corner, and Frodo asks Butterbur who it is. Butterbur says that it's a ranger named Strider and that he roams the wild on his long shanks. A little aside, Butterbur does not say this in the movie, but Jackson and his writers still use the term Longshanks for Sam when he bursts into the room with Frodo and Aragorn in it and says, "I'll have you, Longshanks." Anyway, this is where Jackson diverts from Tolkien's writings. You see, in the book, Frodo actually goes up to Strider and they exchange some words. While they're talking, Frodo realizes that Pippin is oversharing and talking about Bilbo, which invokes the name of Baggins, which Frodo is desperately trying to avoid. So without thinking, Frodo jumps on a table to cut off Pippin mid-story, and he starts giving a speech about how lovely everyone is and how great a time they are having. Since he is up on the table, the people encourage him to sing a song, so he begins a tune that Bilbo wrote himself, and after singing it twice, he jumps off the table and falls to the ground, which causes him to disappear. Everyone who is watching freaks out and immediately backs away from Sam and Pippin, thinking that they're friends of some sorcerer. Frodo crawls over to the corner near where Strider is, and he takes off the ring. It's important to note that Pippin does not say Frodo's real name at any point, Frodo does not get bumped and fall like in the movie, and he does not see the Eye of Sauron while wearing the ring. After he takes the ring off, Frodo tries to convince those around him that he simply fell under the table, but nobody is convinced. The party is quickly cut short due to the strange occurrence. Strider says that he would like to have a private word with Frodo, but is unable to as Butterbur also comes up and says that he also needs a private chat with Frodo before he goes to bed. So after the party disperses, the 3 hobbits head back to their room and Strider sneaks in after them. He does not grab Frodo and drag him into a room as shown by Jackson. The 3 hobbits are surprised by his appearance in their room, but he begins talking to Frodo, saying that he has information and advice, and in exchange, he wants permission to join their journey. He mentions that he has seen them traveling with Tom Bombadil and then coming up to the gate at Bree, and he followed them in. And this is how we know who the figure that climbed over the gate is. Frodo is hesitant, obviously, as he still doesn't know who this Strider exactly is, but before they can discuss anything further, Barliman enters the room in a panic, and this is where we learn of his near-fatal mistake. You see, Barliman Butterbur is a busy and forgetful man, although well-meaning. We learn that months prior, Gandalf had visited and given him a letter saying that it must be delivered at all costs. The letter was addressed to Frodo at Bag End, and Butterbur couldn't find anyone to take it to the Shire, and eventually it just slipped his mind. Gandalf had said that someone might come by the inn by the name of Underhill, and that's why when Frodo introduced himself, Barliman thought he was supposed to be remembering something. At this, Frodo takes the letter and reads it. Gandalf had written that he wanted Frodo to leave the Shire no later than July, and that they might meet someone named Aragorn along the way, who also goes by the name Strider. After all the hobbits have read this letter, they're greatly distressed as they have obviously left months after Gandalf wanted them to, and how because of their late departure, Black Riders are now chasing them and most likely know of their whereabouts. On the bright side, they now know that Strider is a friend of Gandalf's, or so he seems. He later proves it by reciting the poem that's written in the letter that is attached to Aragorn himself. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost, the old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost, and so on. Aragorn also shows him his sword, which they see is broken partway down the blade, and he tells them that it will one day be reforged, just like the poem says. Of course, we know that this is the blade of Elendil that Isildur used to cut off the fingers of Sauron and take the One Ring. This is a major change, because in the films, Aragorn is portrayed as someone who is scared to take up the mantle of king and take charge, whereas in the books, he has carried around the shards of Narsil for a long time, waiting for the right moment. As we know in the films, the shards are kept safely at Rivendell and not with Aragorn. Anyway, moving on to the next change, the three hobbits finally realize that Merry is not with them, and at that moment, Nob comes in the room with Merry, and they hear the story of what has happened to him. As he went on a walk throughout the town, he saw a black figure and felt an urge to chase it. After chasing it for a bit, he lost it and then heard whispers and fell unconscious. Luckily for him, Barliman had sent out Nob to find Merry, and at that moment, Nob saw two figures standing over a body. He shouted at them and they ran off. Nob also mentions that he found Merry's body very near Bill Ferny's house. Now, Bill Ferny is one of the characters that we'll definitely learn more about next week, but for now, just keep in mind that he isn't such a nice guy, and he had been staring at the hobbits the whole time they were in the tavern that night. And we get hints that he may be in league with the Black Riders. This is different from Jackson's version of things, as the Black Riders seem to only work alone in the films, but in the books, they had no problem working through corrupt men and others. After concluding that a Black Rider has been in Bree and might be in league with others, Nob makes up their hobbit beds to look like they're hobbits laying in them by stuffing them with blankets, pillows, and clothes, while Strider takes the four hobbits to his own room and sits guard against the door all night. And that is where we'll be ending off for this week's scene. I know I'm leaving it on a cliffhanger, as you know in the very next scene of the movie we have a climactic moment of the riders storming into Bree, but we can save those scenes and all their major differences for next episode. As for the changes made in this scene, I think we can start to see Jackson's personal, artistic interpretation coming through. As we saw when the Black Rider kills a hobbit in a previous scene of the movie, Jackson wanted to make sure that the viewer was as scared of these creatures as possible, and he loved to build suspense. Having a scene where everyone is having a good old jolly time in the tavern, or having Strider and Frodo strike up a conversation while the others are drinking, doesn't really fit into Jackson's narrative. It also would have added about 10 extra minutes to the scene. Anyway, to address the character of Barliman Butterbur, this is someone who is boiled down to just a couple of lines in the film, but in the books, he plays a massive role for this stop in the Hobbit's journey. Although Frodo was procrastinating leaving the Shire, I think the strongly worded letter from Gandalf would have prompted him to leave in July as instructed, in which case he would have completely avoided the Black Riders. And the sole person to blame for this lack of information is Butterbur, as he simply forgot to deliver the letter. Despite his profuse apologies, Butterbur nearly causes the deaths of all the hobbits by delaying their arrival and by not guarding their room properly, as we'll see in the next week's episode. I think the way Jackson interpreted events is completely fine, and although Barliman's character is funny, he is just too clumsy and causes too many issues to be included in the movie. He also talks way too much. I think if he was included, he would have turned out a lot like a Jar Jar Binks type character in the eyes of the fans. So I personally give Jackson's adaptation of these events and characters a 4 out of 5. And on that note, we can wrap up this week's episode. Thank you for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and stay tuned each week as I continue this series. Have a great week, and see you in the next episode.